What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Salary Arbitration with Agent Rachel Luba.
Welcome to Luba Sports, my friend.
Agent Rachel Luba here.
Got him swinging.
As I promised, I was going to walk you through the entire salary arbitration process as if I was representing a player in it this year. We have created a fake player, Mason Saunders, who I will be representing, and we are going to walk through the process. Now, in the last video that I made, I walked you through how I would look at Mason Saunders' season through the lens of arbitration. However, it's not just about looking at his season in a vacuum. We have to put it in the context of, one, the current class. That means the rest of the starting pitchers who are arbitration eligible for the first time this year. Then the second thing we have to do is we have to look at look-back grids. And now what that is basically we need to look at prior classes of first-time salary arbitration eligible starting pitchers. We have to look at their seasons, what they ended up getting, and then how do we fit this current class into those grids? How do we fit them into those markets based on previous salary arbitration first-time starting pitchers and what they earned? So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how Mason Saunders fits within the current class, which means the first-time salary arb eligible pitchers going into 2021. Now, I'm going to go over it in kind of just a broad sense. The further you get into it and the further the discussions get and the negotiations get, and you start getting closer and closer to an amount, sometimes you're arguing the difference over, maybe $25,000, which might seem like a lot, but in the market for baseball players, that's not a huge amount. So the differences and the distinctions that you'll make will get much more nuanced. I'm not going to go into that in depth of an analysis of these guys, but I'm going to give you a broad sense of how I would place Mason Saunders, given his career and his most recent season, his platform season, how he would fit amongst this current class. So the way that we place pitchers into the market, we separate them depending on kind of groups of different criteria. So the top of this market, I would say, would be Castillo and Giolito. This is how they distinguish themselves. They've essentially pitched an extra season's worth of innings. If you look at the bulk that they have over the entirety of their career thus far, compared to the other guys on the list. They've also qualified in their three most recent seasons leading up to their first time as salary arb eligible players. They've got 3 seasons of qualifying, and they're both trending in the same direction, and that's upwards. They are getting better for the most part. Overall, they're also fairly consistent. They also have award recognition, as do some of the other players on the first-time salary arb eligible starting pitcher list this year, but they do have slightly more and in more recent seasons. That's how I would separate out Castillo and Giolito. They're going to be in their own kind of top part of the market. Then there's the next group, and this is where I would put Buehler, this is where I would put Mason Saunders, and this is where I would put Jack Flaherty. And now here's kind of how I would distinguish those 3 in this part of the market. Okay, so here's how I would distinguish these 3 and why I think they fit in a good group together in the market below Castillo and Giolito. And now certain things that I'm going to say here, you might look at and say, yeah, sure, but there's some other players in here maybe that have only qualified one time or that have similar quality or whatever. But I'll quickly go through those after, and you'll see that there's other eliminating factors as to why they wouldn't fit in this part of the market. So if I look at this part of the market, all 3 of them have qualified one time. One time, one season, they've qualified. Guess what? It also wasn't in their platform season. Here's another way that they kind of fit into their own little part of the market. They're all trending in the wrong direction. They're trending downwards, which means that qualitatively, if you look at their best seasons, they came prior to this most recent season. Additionally, they all have award recognition. They all have considerable award recognition. If you look at Mason Saunders, he's been a 2-time All-Star. Buehler's been an All-Star. Flaherty has never been an All-Star, but they've all received Cy Young votes, as well as they've had some Gold Gloves, MVP votes, etc. They also all have postseason experience. Now, Buehler has the advantage amongst all of them in postseason experience, especially given the fact that he has won a World Series and in his platform season. And most notably, they've all had not the best platform season. It was an incomplete platform season. If you look at Buehler, he was on the IL for part of it. Buehler had better quality in his platform season. However, that's just looking at ERA. If you look at FIP, his FIP actually was not great at all. It was actually drastically different. Now, if you just look at FIP and you make the argument that FIP is the better metric to evaluate pitching, then Mason Saunders actually has the advantage there. Now, you're going to have to figure out from here, well, who should get paid the most out of these three in this part of the market? Now, just looking at these three, let's first look at their quality. Overall, again, as I said, Mason and Flaherty are extremely inconsistent in terms of quality. If you look at the PY, the platform year, Buehler has the advantage in ERA, but if you look at FIP, then it would suggest that Mason actually has the advantage over Buehler. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys are thinking, well, like ERA, FIP, those are very basic ways to evaluate quality. Here's the thing. In salary arbitration, if you have to go to a hearing, those are basically the two biggest ways for a starting pitcher to evaluate their quality. ERA and FIP. And if we look at the trends for quality, they're all kind of trending in the wrong direction. They're all kind of trending down season by season. Buehler's isn't as drastic necessarily, again, mostly looking at ERA, but they're all trending downwards. They've all had their best seasons before the platform season. Now let's look at their bulk, which are their overall numbers of production. Overall, Flaherty has a slight advantage here. If you look at the platform season, Mason has a slight advantage here. If you look at the trends of the bulk, they're all fairly inconsistent. Buehler and Flaherty have qualified more recently compared to Mason, who qualified his one and only time in his PY -2. Now, if you look at the awards, again, Flaherty never been an All-Star. Buehler's been an All-Star. Mason's been a 2-time All-Star. They all have Cy Young votes. They all have award recognition. So they all kind of belong in this part of the market because a lot of times that will distinguish other players. They might have everything else, but not the award recognition. And so it'll be easy for the team to make the argument they don't belong in that kind of stratosphere. And then we already went over, but postseason success. They've all been in the postseason. That is a plus for players if they've been in the postseason. And then you've got Buehler, who has a World Series championship, so that's going to set him apart slightly amongst these guys. Now, because I am Mason's agent, I'm going to want to make the argument that I think he should be slightly above these guys. And that's because I will argue that, if we look at the season that Mason qualified in his PY -2, he had an ERA that was a 2.85. The only time that Walker qualified, his ERA was a 3.26. Now, Flaherty, he had his best season. He had 196 innings, and he had a 2.75 ERA. So right on par with Mason. It was more recent. However, he's been much more inconsistent in terms of quality, and he had a much worse platform season compared to Mason, whereas Mason almost qualified in his PY -1. Right, he had 159 innings, so just barely missed it. And in both of the 2 seasons before his platform season, he had a sub-3 ERA. Again, I'm going to make the argument that Buehler missed time in his platform year because he was on the IL, And if you look at his best season, it wasn't at the level that Mason Saunders had. Additionally, if you look at the quality, even though if you just look at ERA, it looks like Mason didn't have quite as good of a season in his platform year as Buehler. Again, if we look at FIP, it says the opposite. I always talk about how certain players in the current class can affect other players in the market. This is a scenario where your current class and the guys in your market, so for Mason, it would be Buehler and Flaherty, they will affect, if they settle before Mason does, they're going to affect in some way Mason's number and what he will settle for. If they set the bar really high, that's great for us. But what if I'm negotiating with the team for a number that's above what all of a sudden Buehler settles for? They might argue, well, like, then it's got to be a lot closer to that number than where I was at. So they all kind of influence one another, and it's why in the kind of 48 hours leading up to the deadline, it gets really tricky, and you got to pay attention to the current class of guys as well and what they're doing and the guys in your market. Now I'm going to go and kind of distinguish the other players in this market that I think you might look at first and be like, well, why are they not relevant? But kind of here's my take on why. If you look at Fried, his role in his -2 and -3, he had a mixed role. He was in the bullpen as well as a starting pitcher. So he was never a full-time starting pitcher like the other guys in the market that I've explained before. Also, if you look at his PY -1, he started in the bullpen, ended in the bullpen, and actually in the postseason, he was put back in the bullpen. So we would look at that as kind of a decline, a demotion in role. So it's easy to say, oh, well, like he qualified once, he qualified in his PY -1, but he's had nearly, I would say, a season worth less of innings, and he has had a mixed role throughout his career. Now, if we look at Brandon Woodruff, his role, similarly, he lost his job in his PY -2, and he was put into the bullpen, so a demotion. He did qualify one time, and that was in his platform year, and he had no IL days. He's definitely trending actually in the right direction. He's doing better in that regard, but he's never even had a season with a sub-3 ERA. So I would almost say they're not really relevant because they haven't both been full-time starting pitchers throughout their career. And, Woodruff, while he's had his best season, in the platform year, and he qualified, and his platform season was really good. The problem is that he's never hit the same level of quality as the guys above him in the market. Now let's look at Keller. If you look at the career, it looks somewhat similar to Mason. However, he's never had the level of quality that Mason has in any season, and he doesn't have any award recognition. So automatically I'm going to say that distinguishes him in the market. He's in a different stratosphere. Also, in his PY -2, he started off in the bullpen, so he hasn't for his whole career been a full-time starting pitcher. Okay, let's look at Yarbrough. He's never qualified. Automatically, he's not in the same part of the market. If you've never qualified, that is going to distinguish you usually. And most importantly, his role, he's never been a full-time starting pitcher. So he is not going to be anywhere near Mason in the market. Okay, let's look at Soroka. Now, Soroka, the bulk just doesn't even come close to comparing over the course of his career. Qualitatively, they've been comparable, and he did have one qualifying season in his PY -1, and that was his best season qualitatively. But he missed way too much of his platform year for him to be able to compare, I would argue, to Mason, to Buehler, and to Flaherty. Now let's look at Weaver. Weaver never qualified, and he never had even close to the same level of quality as Mason. Montes, he's a perfect example when I talk about career path. He's had an up and down career path. He didn't have his first full year of Major League service until 2020. He also started as a reliever, so a different role. And let's look at the innings pitched. The most he ever pitched in a single season was 96 innings, and that was in his PY -1, so in 2019, before his PED suspension. So he's had inconsistent quality. It's taken him until his platform year to even have a full year of Major League service. So that's going to kind of separate him into just a different part of the market. Then let's look at Senzatella. Same thing. Inconsistent career path, up and down. He had full major league service in his first year. Then he spent 2 seasons up and down being optioned. That's a break or inconsistent career path. Remember, when you first get called up, you want to stay up. Or once you finally get your first full year of major league service, you want to have multiple back-to-back years of full MLS. And then let's look at Brault. His role, biggest thing. He's never been a full-time starting pitcher and qualitatively inferior to Mason. Hopefully that helps give you guys kind of an idea of how I would look at this current class market and where I would fit Mason Saunders in. In the next video, I am going to take Mason Saunders and I'm going to see how he compares now with former first-time eligible starting pitchers and where he would fit in that market. Because ultimately, we can have the order of how the current class sits, but we have to figure out where the salaries even start for the top of the market, right? Castillo and Giolito. Where are they going to go? And then the market's going to kind of go down from there in this current class. The way we get to that number is we need to look at previous seasons. We want to stay as recent as possible. We don't want to go back 10 years, even 5 usually, especially for first-time players because there's always so many to use. We want to stay maybe 1 year or 2 years back and find comps from maybe 2019 and 2018 who are similar to these players and stack them up in the market and see, okay, well, these guys got, let's say, 3.5 million. These guys this year, they look similar. We're going to argue that they deserve the same. You also you're not going to be able to make the arguments of inflation, really. It's a lot of why the salary arbitration market frustrates me because it's a very stagnant market. You're always determining salaries based on players from years prior. And guess how those guys from years prior are determining their salary? From players years prior to that. And we don't factor in inflation. So it's really hard to move the market a lot of times. But it's why when you get guys at the top of the market, if you get them to go to a hearing and to expand the market and to set new records, then the market eventually starts moving up. But a lot of times clubs aren't eager to do that and just give you a record-setting number because they want to keep salaries the same, suppressed. They don't want the market always moving up and up and up each year. Anyways, hopefully that was helpful, gave you guys a sense of how I would fit Mason Saunders into this first-time salary arbitration eligible starting pitcher market. And make sure to like and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss the next episode, which will look at past classes, past starting pitcher markets, and see how now this current class will fit in there.